On the day of my 75th birthday, my son yelled, "Everyone is sick of you, get out!" His wife threw my festive cake onto the floor, but what I did next made the guests gasp, and the very next morning, my son's life was reduced to a disaster. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for joining me. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story, and write in the comments what city or country you're listening from. It warms my heart to know how far my words travel. Enjoy the listen. Today I turned 75. The number felt round, substantial, like an old oak tree. You stand in front of the mirror in the morning, and it stares back at you from the depths, from the wrinkles around your eyes, from the gray at your temples. Was I scared? No, it was more like a quiet bewilderment. Is this really me? Has all of this really happened to me? My small two-bedroom apartment in the city smelled of brown sugar and sweet spices. I'd been busy in the kitchen since dawn, baking my signature sweet potato pound cake, the one my mother passed down to me. I baked it when I married my husband, Jabari. I baked it for Keon's first birthday, for all his birthdays, and for his send-off before he left for boot camp. It felt like my entire life was permeated with that warm, sweet aroma. For me, it smelled like home, like love. I ran my hand across the old kitchen table where I rolled the cake layers. Its smooth surface, speckled with fine scratches, remembered Jabari, young and strong, fixing a broken iron on it, and little Keon building towers out of wooden blocks. Today, the table held only flour and a rolling pin, and my hands weren't as quick as they used to be. The dough was easy to handle, warm and alive. As I rolled out a thin circle, disconnected fragments, not thoughts, played in my head. Keon had called yesterday. "Mom, I need you to bail me out. It's urgent. The car needs a new part, a really critical one." His voice sounded so worried. How could I say no? I withdrew what I had saved for a rainy day, nearly my whole Social Security check, and gave it to him. "Thanks, Mom, you're the best," he'd said, rushing out the door. I sighed then, not out of annoyance, but out of that specific maternal duty. It's like a debt, isn't it? As long as you're alive, you have to help your children. Even if the children are almost 50, and you yourself are left with a couple of crumpled $20 bills until the next check, it's fine. I'm used to living frugally. I can get by on rice and beans. The main thing is that they're okay. One by one, the pound cake layers went into the oven, and the apartment filled with comfort. I looked at the photograph on the wall. Jabari and I, young, standing arm in arm next to the vacation house we were building. He did almost all the work himself. He dreamed that we would live there in retirement, plant roses, and raise our grandkids. He didn't make it. He passed too soon, leaving me to raise a 15-year-old Keon alone. I was a senior design engineer then. I had projects, business trips, and dreams of traveling. I wanted to take a Great Lakes cruise, see Mackinac Island, but I had to give it all up. I had to forget it. I needed to raise my son. I clung to that task like a life raft. My entire life, all my strength, all my unfulfilled dreams. It all went into him, into my boy. And now that boy is almost 50, and I'm still baking him the sweet potato pound cake. We decided to celebrate the birthday at the lake house. The lake house, of course. According to my daughter-in-law, Serafina, my apartment was too tight and dated, like a storage unit. She'd said so without flinching when I suggested hosting the guests here, looking somewhere past me as she spoke. Kiana just shrugged like, "Well, Mom, Serafina's right. The lake house has more space and fresh air." I didn't argue. The lake house was, formally, mine. The only thing left from Jabari, from our life together. But I rarely went there. Serafina and Keon had been living there for about 15 years since they got married. They rebuilt it, furnished it their own way. Modern and trendy. Nothing of Jabari's was left. They even cut down the old maples we planted together. "They just make shade and a mess," Serafina had said. In their place was a perfectly manicured lawn and a fancy modern fire pit. I visited my own house like a guest. The guests started arriving around 3 o'clock. I had brought bags of groceries by taxi that morning, preparing appetizers, salads, and pinwheel sandwiches. Serafina met the guests on the porch, smiling in a beautiful dress. She kissed my cheek briefly. She smelled of expensive perfume and slight irritation. "Mrs. Okoro, why don't you head to the kitchen? You need to finish the cheese board and keep an eye on the hot dishes so they don't get cold." And I went. My birthday turned into a typical day of servitude. I stood in the kitchen, which I barely recognized, all shiny tile and built-in stainless steel, slicing cheese and meat, arranging them on platters. Laughter, clinking glasses, and snippets of conversation drifted from the living room. My name was only mentioned once, when someone shouted, "Where's the birthday girl?" Serafina answered in her bright voice, "Oh, she's our little helper, busy in the kitchen." And everyone laughed again. I brought out the platters, placed them on the table, and immediately cleared the dirty ones. No one offered me a seat. I was just part of the decor, silent and functional. At one point, I sat down on the edge of a chair, a little distance away. The conversation turned to the lake house. One of Jabari's old friends, Elias Eli Dubois, reminisced. "I remember, Imani, when Jabari and I planted that tall pine right here. Look how big it's gotten." I smiled. I wanted to support that warm island of memory. "Yes, and we buried a treasure underneath it," I started. "Kian was just a baby. We wrapped it in a handkerchief." "Oh, Dad, please, not the old stories again," Serafina interrupted, turning to her own father. "Kian and I are thinking of flying to Turks and Caicos next year. The beaches there are amazing. The service is top-notch. Not like these old pines and mosquitoes." The conversation instantly switched to Turks and Caicos, all-inclusive resorts, and ticket prices. My buried treasure, a piece of broken glass and 3 marbles and a rusty quarter, was left to lie forgotten in the ground. I felt something cold and heavy sink in my chest. I stood up and silently walked back to the kitchen. I'd rather wash dishes than sit there invisible at my own birthday table. And then came the climax. Time for the cake, my sweet potato pound cake. I had spent half a day on it. The layers were soaked in cream cheese frosting, becoming tender, melting in your mouth. I had topped it with shaved chocolate and pecans, carefully outlining the number 75. I carried it out on the large round platter given to us for our 25th anniversary. I carried it with a final, desperate hope. Here it was, my symbol of love, my main gift. Maybe now. I placed the cake in the center of the table. It looked truly homemade, truly authentic. "Oh, Imani Sadia, why would you do that?" Serafina's voice rang loudly across the living room, laced with undisguised contempt. "We already have a normal store-bought cake from a fancy bakery. No one is going to eat this sad little homemade thing." An awkward silence fell. I felt like I stopped breathing, but then Elias Dubois, my husband's old friend, tried to salvage the moment. "Now, Serafina, Imani's pound cake? That's the taste of childhood. That's a real tradition. I'll definitely have a slice. Give me 2. And that was the final straw. The word tradition, spoken in front of her trendy, wealthy friends, sounded like an insult to Serafina. It shattered the image of the modern, successful hostess she had so carefully constructed. Her face twisted. Cold fury flashed in her eyes. With a quick, practiced movement, she grabbed my platter. "Tradition belongs in a museum," she hissed through clenched teeth. And in front of all the stunned guests, she flipped the platter over, dumping my pound cake, my effort, my love, right into the trash can next to the wall. "We're celebrating the future!" A deafening, absolute silence hung in the room. The only sound was the dull, wet thump as the cake settled at the bottom of the can. Everyone looked from the trash can to me. I stood there petrified and looked at my son. I waited, hoping he would stand up, say something, stop this nightmare. Kian stood up. His face was scarlet, distorted. He looked at the horror in the guest's eyes, at his wife's triumphant face, and he found a culprit, the most defenseless one. He turned to me, pointing a trembling finger, and yelled so loudly my ears rang. "Look what you did! You've embarrassed us! Everyone is sick of you. You can't behave normally. Get out of here. Get out, I'm telling you. Everyone is tired of you." In that moment, something inside me didn't break. No, it just snapped, like a thin, overtaut wire that had been vibrating with tension for the last 50 years. It didn't snap with a loud sound. It simply ceased to exist. The ringing in my ears didn't fade. It focused into a single, pure, high note, and a deep, unsettling stillness descended. It was as if the part of me that had spent its whole life hoping, excusing, forgiving, and waiting for love had just been cut out without anesthetic by a surgeon's single, precise motion. I looked at my son's face, contorted by his scream, and I realized this is no longer my cake, this is no longer my lake house, and this is no longer my problem. I nodded once, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement of my head up and down. Agreed. I turned around, not looking back at my son's crimson face or the guests' frozen expressions. I took a step, then another. My legs moved on their own, as if on a long-established but forgotten path. Behind me was a vacuum of silence. I reached the foyer and took my old light trench coat from the hook. The fingers that were trembling half an hour ago while tying my apron now moved with confident precision, buttoning the coat. 1, 2, 3. Everything in place. I put on my scarf, took my purse. Inside were an empty wallet, the keys to my city apartment, and a handkerchief. That was enough. I didn't turn around. I didn't say a word. I simply opened the front door, stepped into the cool evening air, and quietly closed the door behind me. The click of the lock sounded like a period placed at the end of a very long, very exhausting sentence. I walked toward the bus stop, barely paying attention to the road. Streetlights snatched out of the darkness a lilac bush, a sagging fence. The world existed somewhere separate from me. Inside, there was only that high, pure note. It canceled out all feelings. There was no pain, no hurt, no anger. There was only deafening clarity. A battered old city bus rattled up. I sat by the window on the cold faux leather seat. Outside the glass, the lights of strangers' houses and the silhouettes of trees drifted by. And in my head, like an accountant closing the year-end books, facts were methodically and dispassionately sorted onto shelves. Not grievances, just facts. Here is fact number 1. My Molly gold pendant. A gift from Jabari for my 30th birthday. Heavy, honey-colored gold. I cherished it. About 5 years ago, it went missing. I searched the whole apartment, fretted, and even cried secretly. 6 months later, I saw it on Serafina's neck in a vacation photo. She was laughing, her head thrown back, and the sun sparkled on my gold. When I stammered a question, she casually replied, "Oh, I found this at an antique shop. Can you believe it? Almost identical." I knew she was lying, but I kept silent. Fact number 2. The money. How many times had I given them my savings? For the down payment on the car, for emergency repairs to the lake house roof, for good tutoring for my granddaughter before college. I lived on yogurt and bread so they could go to Turks and Caicos to help the kids de-stress. They never once invited me along. I was useful as an ATM, but not as a family member. I looked at their photos, tanned and happy, against the azure sea, and I told myself, the main thing is that they are all right. Fact number 3, the gradual erasure of me from their lives and from my own house. First, my pictures moved from the living room to the corridor by the guest bathroom. Then my favorite mug, the one I drank tea from when I visited, was accidentally broken. Then, Keon less and less often called me Mom, switching to the formal Mrs. Okoro, especially in front of Serafina's friends. It was like slowly scrubbing an old inscription clean to write a new, shiny one in its place. The bus jolted over potholes. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass, a tired, elderly woman in a simple coat. And trailing behind this woman was a long train of swallowed words, erased hurts, and one-sided love. A one-way street. And tonight, I had reached the end. The gate had dropped. He said, "Get out." A son's wish is law. I would grant his wish, literally. That night, I slept better than I had since my youth, without dreams, without anxious thoughts, without the familiar lump in my throat. It was as if an impossible burden, one I had carried for so long I considered it part of myself, had been lifted from my shoulders. I woke up to bright morning sun streaming through the window, and for the first time in years, the air in the room didn't feel stale with loneliness. It was light. It was full of freedom. I got up, washed my face, and brewed coffee. My movements were unhurried, but full of a new, unfamiliar purpose. I didn't make a plan. I simply knew what needed to be done. From the old wardrobe, I took out a cardboard folder tied with string. It held all of our important documents. Here was the marriage certificate, here was Jabari's death certificate, and at the very bottom, a thick official document, the deed of title. I ran my finger over the typewritten line. Subject of right, Imani Sadia Okoro. Type of right, sole ownership, the sole owner. I looked at the seal in the corner, and it suddenly reminded me of the blueprints from my past life. A memory surfaced, so vivid it felt like yesterday. I was 35. Jabari had been gone for almost a year. Keon, a difficult teenager, had gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd, and I was called into the company's main office in Atlanta. They offered me the head position of the experimental design studio at a major aerospace firm. My own lab, a corporate apartment, completely different prospects. It was a peak I had never dared to dream of. I sat in the high-ceilinged office, holding the order for my appointment, and saw not new machinery, but my son's bewildered face. I thought about how he would be left alone in our two-bedroom apartment, how I would be torn between two cities, and how the lake house, which we had just finished building, would be overgrown with weeds, and I refused. I said, "Thank you, I can't, I have a son." I returned home and poured all of myself, all my unrealized engineering talent, into keeping that house, that semblance of stability, for him. I sacrificed my career for that lake house, the same lake house I was kicked out of last night. I put the document on the table. The memory didn't cause pain. It was the final missing piece of the mosaic, the last argument for the internal judge. My hand confidently picked up the phone. First, I dialed the number of the real estate agency I had seen in the paper. A cheerful man's voice answered, "Good morning, Guarantee Realty. How can I help you?" "Hello," I said. My voice was even and firm. I surprised myself. "My name is Imani Sadia Okoro. I would like to list the lake house and property for urgent sale. The property on Maplewood Drive in the Lakeview Shores development." "Got it, Mrs. Okoro. When would it be convenient for our specialist to come by for inspection and appraisal?" "Anytime. Today," I replied. "The key to the gate is under the large stone to the left of the entrance. All the documents are in order, right here in my hands. Please act as quickly as possible." "Understood. We'll get right on it." I hung up without a trace of doubt. Then I dialed another number, my only real friend, Desta. We had sat at the same desk in college. She was the only one who had always seen through my family. "Imani," her familiar, slightly raspy voice answered. "Happy birthday, dear. I called yesterday and couldn't reach you. How was the party?" I silently listened to her cheerful greeting, and then quietly, without emotion, I told her in a few sentences about the cake, the trash can, and Keon's scream. Silence hung on the other end, and then Desta exhaled. "Finally," she said, her voice a mix of relief and warmth. "Finally, Imani. I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. They mistook your patients for a doormat. So what are you going to do?" Her question was direct, without unnecessary sentiment. She knew the issue wasn't the cake. "The agent is listing the lake house for sale this afternoon," I calmly replied. Desta chuckled approvingly into the phone. "Good, very good. Now listen to me closely. They'll start calling soon, screaming, crying, trying to play on your guilt. Don't answer. Under no circumstances. Let that for sale sign speak for you. It will be more eloquent than any words." "Okay, Desta," I said. "Hang in there, friend. You're doing the right thing." I hung up the phone. There was silence in my soul. Not the dead silence of the vacuum from last night, but the quiet, clear stillness of an autumn morning. It was settled. There was no turning back. A few days passed, days of a quiet I hadn't known in years. The telephone on the dresser was silent, and that silence spoke volumes. I knew what they were thinking. They were waiting for me to cool off, as usual, bake some biscuits, come with a contrite head, and apologize for daring to upset them with my existence. They were waiting for me to call and say, "Kian, son, forgive your silly old mother." This pattern had worked flawlessly for decades, but the mechanism was broken. I wasn't waiting. I was living. I got up in the morning and did the exercises I'd abandoned 20 years ago. I went to the store and bought myself not the cheapest cottage cheese, but the one I liked. I took my old knitting needles and a ball of yarn from the closet and started knitting, a simple, unadorned scarf. Row after row, stitch after stitch. The rhythmic clicking of the needles was soothing. This was creation. I was creating something simple, warm, and entirely for myself. Outwardly, nothing in my life had changed, but inside, everything had. I stopped being a function, an appendage to their well-being. I was Imani Sadia Okoro again, not just a mother and mother-in-law, but an independent person. I knew this was the calm before the storm. I didn't see it, but I could clearly picture the realtor's car pulling up to the lake house. I could see the serious man in a suit taking a hammer and a large, bright sign from his trunk. I saw him walking across Serafina's perfect lawn, choosing a spot, and with a few precise hammer blows, driving the post with the word "for sale" into the earth that belonged to Jabari and me. That sign was my reply, my statement, my farewell. And then, on the third afternoon, the phone exploded. It rang frantically, demandingly, choking on its own shriek. I sat in my armchair and knitted. I watched the machine, which seemed about to jump off the dresser. Kian called, then Serafina, then Kian again. I didn't answer. I had nothing to say to them. Everything I wanted to say was written on that sign by the gate. They weren't calling to apologize. They were calling to demand an explanation, to put everything back in its place, but the old places no longer existed. By evening, they arrived. I knew they would. I heard the car pull into the driveway, the doors slamming, but I didn't get up. I continued knitting. Row after row, stitch after stitch. I didn't hear a knock. I heard a sharp, unpleasant clang in the keyhole. They didn't even knock. They walked into my house with their own key, like owners. That was the final touch, definitively confirming the rightness of my decision. The door flew open. They stood on the threshold. Serafina had red splotches on her face and neck. Her eyes shot daggers. Kian was pale, bewildered, his lips trembling. They saw me sitting calmly in the armchair with my knitting, and for a moment they froze. They probably expected to find me in tears, hysterical, but certainly not this picture of domestic peace. Serafina recovered first. She stormed into the room like a fury. "Have you lost your mind?" Her voice was shrill. "What is this? What kind of circus are you pulling? You've decided to ruin us, to throw your own son, your grandchildren out into the street." I was silent. I just lifted my eyes and looked not at her face, contorted with malice, but right through her. I didn't see rage. I saw primal fear. The fear of losing the beautiful picture she had so long and carefully painted at my expense. Kian joined in, choosing a different tactic, the soft, manipulative one that had always worked. He came closer, looking into my eyes. "Mom, what happened? Why are you doing this? Are you punishing us for the cake?" "Mom, I'm sorry. Serafina got carried away, but this is our home, our shared home, the home of our children. Where will we go?" The word "our" sounded especially hollow in the silent room. Our home, where I was relegated to the role of cook, where I was a source of shame, where my effort and my love were tossed into the trash. I let them talk themselves out. I allowed their shouts and pleas to hang in the air and die. I looked at my son, at his desperate face, and for the first time, I felt no pang of pity. Maternal love, it seemed, had drained out of me to the very last drop that night, on that birthday. Only cold, crystalline clarity remained. When they fell silent, exhausted, I placed my knitting on the small side table, neatly, without dropping a single stitch. And only then did I answer. My voice was quiet, but in the ringing silence of the apartment, it sounded like the blow of a hammer. "This is not your home." They both flinched. "This is my property," I continued, just as evenly, looking Kian straight in the eye. "A house you have lived in for free for 15 years. I never asked you for rent. I never asked you for money for the taxes. I only ever gave." "But I'm your son. You're my mother," Kian stammered. This was his last trump card, thrown onto the table. I slightly inclined my head. My gaze, I knew, was unfamiliar to him. It contained none of the maternal warmth he was accustomed to. "The mother everyone is sick of," I said, quoting his own words. "The mother who embarrasses you. The mother who should get out. Remember, Kian, you asked me to leave." He recoiled as if I had struck him. "And I am finally granting your request," I said, and my voice, perhaps for the first time in my life, acquired the hardness of steel. "I am leaving completely. You see, my old-fashioned cake, my old lake house, my savings, all of these are parts of me. They are all connected to me. And since you don't need me, you won't get any of it." They stared at me like I was a ghost. They couldn't believe these words were coming from their quiet, compliant, always available mother and mother-in-law. Serafina opened her mouth to shout something, but no words came out. Kian just stood there, silently gulping air. I stood up from the armchair. "The decision has been made. The agent has all the instructions. He is already looking for buyers. You will need to provide access for showings. You have 30 days to find yourselves a new place to live and move your things out." I said this and knew I had nothing more to add. Everything had been said. I walked past them to the window and looked out into the yard, at the old bench where I once sat with Jabari. I didn't look at them, but I felt their world crumbling. A world built on someone else's foundation. My real world was just beginning to be built. They left, leaving behind a heavy residue of confusion and anger in the air of my apartment. I felt nothing but silence. I walked over to the phone and pulled the cord out of the wall. No more calls, no more screaming, no more accusations. Everything that needed to be said, I had said. Everything that needed to be done, I had done. The following weeks were strange. The echoes of their crumbling world reached me like a distant sound. A couple of times, Serafina's frightened mother called, incoherently begging me to reconsider and have mercy on the children. I politely replied that I had had mercy on them all my life, and now it was time for them to take care of themselves. After the second such call, I stopped answering her too. One day, Desta called. Her voice was sympathetic, but without a hint of judgment. "I saw Serafina at the county health clinic yesterday," she said. "She doesn't exactly look like the Queen of Turks and Caicos. She's aged 10 years. They say they moved out and found some run-down 2-bedroom rental across the county line. Kian took a second job stocking shelves at night, and she's running around to interviews. But after 15 years of being a house manager, no one's really hiring her. They're fighting terribly, they say." I listened, and I felt neither schadenfreude nor satisfaction. There was only a feeling of inevitability. It was like watching an autumn leaf break from a branch and fall to the ground. Its flight might be long or short, but the ending is foretold. They detached themselves from the branch that nourished them. I wasn't the cause of their fall. I was merely a condition that they had stopped fulfilling. The lake house sold, surprisingly fast. Buyers were found almost immediately. A young family who, according to the realtor, fell in love with the place at first sight. On the day of the closing, I sat in the agency's office, signing the papers. My hand didn't tremble. When the sum of money with so many zeros, a sum I couldn't have imagined, was deposited into my savings account, I felt no euphoria. I felt weight, a pleasant, substantial weight of possibilities. This wasn't just money. These were the years of my grounded life. This was my unrealized career. These were all the dresses I hadn't bought and all the retreats I hadn't gone to. It all came back to me in the form of a bank transfer. The first thing I did was sign up for a high-end hearing center. I had been hearing poorly in one ear for years. but I always dismissed it as too expensive or something that could wait. They fitted me with a small, almost invisible digital apparatus. When I stepped outside and turned it on for the first time, I froze. I heard the crunch of leaves underfoot, the chirp of a sparrow high above, the faint hum of power lines overhead. The world crashed down on me in an avalanche of sounds I had long forgotten, and I cried for the first time through this whole ordeal. But these were tears not of sorrow, but of rediscovery. Then I bought a coat. All my life I had worn something practical, stain-resistant, gray or black. But then I saw this one in a store window. A trench coat of deep, saturated royal blue, the color of the Mississippi River at dusk. It was completely impractical, but incredibly beautiful. I went in and tried it on. It fit me perfectly, and I bought it without a second thought. When I walked out onto the street in that new blue coat, I felt like someone else, not an old lady seeing out her days, but a woman. Just a woman. And then I fulfilled my oldest, most cherished dream, the one Jabari and I had held on to. I booked a 10-day Great Lakes cruise from Chicago to Mackinac Island. I remembered how we had saved for that trip, and then all the money went to Keon's college tutors. "It's okay, Imani," Jabari had said then. "Our son is more important. We'll still get there." We didn't get there. And before leaving, I did one more thing. I found the number for a community college online and signed up for an introductory course in textile design, batik. I suddenly desperately wanted to return to where I had started, to take fabric and dyes in my hands and feel the pattern being born under my fingers again, to feel harmony emerge from the chaos of color. And so, here I am. I'm standing on the deck of a pristine white ship. The cool river wind ruffles my new scarf, and I pull my blue coat tight around me. The green shores, the golden church domes, and small towns drift slowly past. The ship glides smoothly, cutting through the water, leaving a long, foamy wake behind the stern. In my hands I hold a sketchbook. I open it to a clean page. Colored pencils lie beside me. I look at the ripple on the water, at the play of light and shadow, and my hand begins to trace a pattern on its own. Smooth, intertwining lines like waves. I feel neither anger nor bitterness. I hold no resentment toward the past and no fear of the future. There is only this moment, this blue sky, this vastness, this quiet, profound sense of peace, as deep as the lake itself. For 75 years, my world was the size of my small apartment and the lake house kitchen. I gave away my life, my money, and my heart. They took it all and threw it on the floor like that cake. But on those ruins, I didn't try to restore the old life. I simply walked away and began to build a new one, and it is all mine. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched you, please give it a like and write in the comments if you or your loved ones have ever faced similar disrespect. Your support means a lot to me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Be well, value yourself, and live for real.